Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Gossips 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Brooke Forrester had spent her entire life believing she could withstand any storm, that no matter how intense the pressure or how overwhelming the chaos, she would eventually find her footing again, because that was what she had always done. She had survived scandals, betrayals, affairs, heartbreaks, illnesses, humiliations, and the endless cycle of Forrester and Logan family warfare. But what she was facing now felt different, darker, as if the walls around her world were slowly closing in, pressing against her chest until the weight of her own breath felt unbearable. She had avoided this moment for years, maybe decades, burying a truth she hoped would never claw its way to the surface, a truth she had convinced herself she could take to the grave. But now, with Ridge looking at her with eyes clouded by suspicion and hope standing behind her, trembling with worry, Brooke realized the luxury of silence had run out, and the only path forward was one she had spent her entire life desperately running from, because once she spoke this secret, once she allowed it to escape the prison of her memory, nothing, not her marriage, not her family, not her reputation, would ever be the same again, and yet she could no longer hold on to it. Not when the consequences of her silence had already begun to spread like poison through the people she loved most. So she inhaled deeply, shakily, as if preparing to step onto a cliff's edge, and she began to reveal the truth she had locked away for so long. A truth so explosive hope felt her legs weaken. A truth so heavy that Ridge instinctively reached for the back of a chair to keep himself grounded. Because Brooke wasn't just confessing a mistake. She was confessing something deadly. Something that had happened years ago but had the power to devastate the present. She told them everything. How she had once found herself entangled in a moment of desperation and fear with someone she should never have trusted. Someone whose presence in their lives had always been a source of conflict and danger. Someone Ridge had begged her to stay away from countless times. She spoke about the night things spiraled out of control, how a simple argument turned into a confrontation, how a confrontation turned into a struggle. And how that struggle ended with a terrible, irreversible accident that Brooke had never intended. A moment she had replayed in her mind 1,000 times. A moment where she realized too late that she had been cornered, manipulated, and pushed until panic took over. And in the chaos, she made a choice that would haunt her forever. Ridge stood frozen as Brooke described the panic, the blood, the terrifying silence that followed, and the way she had dropped to her knees afterward, shaking uncontrollably, knowing that what had happened could never be undone. Her voice cracked and fractured as she explained how she had wiped her hands, gathered herself, and walked away because the fear of losing her children, her freedom, and her marriage had suffocated every instinct she had to tell the truth. And though she had convinced herself that burying it was the only way to protect everyone she loved, that choice, she now realized, had created a ripple effect that touched every part of her life, especially Hope's. When Brooke admitted she had never told a soul, not Ridge, not her sisters, not Taylor, not even Hope, her daughter felt her stomach turn, because suddenly the woman she had always seen as strong, soft, and loving felt like a stranger, someone capable of carrying a monstrous weight alone, and Hope didn't know whether she admired her or feared what else she might be capable of. Ridge asked who it was, who she had been hiding, who she had hurt, and when Brooke whispered the name, his breath hitched so sharply Hope thought he might faint, because it wasn't just anyone. It was someone whose disappearance had once shaken the Forrester world, someone they had all assumed had left town in shame or had gotten caught up in another one of their scandals and fled, someone Ridge himself had blamed for chaos in their family, never knowing that the truth had been sitting right across from him for years in the eyes of the woman he trusted most. As Brooke continued, tears streaming down her face, she explained how the guilt had eaten at her, how every time Ridge defended her, every time Hope leaned on her, every time the family fought about loyalty, she felt the secret twisting inside her like a knife, but she held on to it because she couldn't risk everything falling apart. Yet ironically, it was that silence that eventually made the situation far worse, because recently someone had been stirring up old memories, someone had been watching the Forrester and Logan families with suspicious intent, someone who knew more than they should, and Brooke realized that if she didn't come clean now, someone else would expose her, and that kind of public destruction would annihilate everything. Ridge's jaw clenched as he tried to understand how the woman he had loved for decades, the woman he had defended again and again, could have kept something like this from him. He felt betrayed, gutted, furious, but also terrified because this wasn't a typical Brooke mistake. This was criminal, dangerous, life-altering. Hope couldn't speak. Her mind flashed back to every moment she had nearly lost her mother, every time she had defended her, every time she had insisted that Brooke was misunderstood or unfairly judged, and now she wondered how she could reconcile the mother she adored with the woman who had just confessed to something so unthinkable. Brooke continued talking, her voice trembling, explaining how after the incident she had been approached by someone who witnessed everything, someone who had used that knowledge to manipulate her for years, someone who had demanded favors, information, and loyalty in exchange for silence, and Ridge's stomach dropped as he realized this wasn't just a secret. It was blackmail, years of it, years of Brooke being controlled and coerced, years of choices he never understood because she had been too afraid to tell him the truth. When Brooke revealed how that person had recently resurfaced, threatening to expose everything unless she did exactly what they wanted, Ridge's anger morphed into something else, fear, because if this person was back, if they were desperate, then the family was in danger. Hope, meanwhile, felt hot tears spill down her cheeks as she asked her mother why she hadn't come to her, why she hadn't trusted her, why she had carried this trauma alone for so long, and Brooke broke down, sobbing, insisting she had wanted to protect Hope, to protect everyone she loved, to prevent this nightmare from spiraling into another Forrester versus Logan war. But Hope couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, and Ridge couldn't control the rage building in his chest as he demanded to know everything Brooke had done to keep this buried. Every phone call, every threat, every manipulation, and the more she revealed, the more his world cracked open. He felt himself losing grip on the woman he thought he knew inside and out. How could she have kept something so dark from him? How could she have allowed someone dangerous to hover around their family for years without telling him? His trust wasn't just broken, it was obliterated. Brooke saw the shift in his posture, the way his eyes hardened, the way he held himself like a man realizing his marriage might not survive the night, and she felt something inside her collapse. Ridge whispered that he didn't even know who she was anymore, that he couldn't reconcile the woman he loved with the woman who just stood before him confessing something that could destroy their family's legacy. And Brooke begged him to understand, to remember who she really was, to see past this terrible chapter she had tried so hard to outrun. But Ridge couldn't breathe. The room felt full of ghosts. All the lies, all the secrets, all the moments that suddenly made sense now, and each one chipped away at the foundation of their relationship. Hope, caught between heartbreak and horror, stepped back slowly, as if watching her world tilt sideways, because for the first time in her life, she didn't know if she could trust her mother. And yet, she also saw Brooke's fear, her pain, her desperation, and Hope knew this wasn't a story about malice. It was a story about a terrible life-changing mistake that spiraled into blackmail, fear, and years of emotional imprisonment. Brooke pleaded with both of them, insisting she had never wanted any of this, that she had tried to protect them, but as Ridge stepped away, shaking his head, she realized she might have just destroyed the very life she had been trying to save. The silence that followed was suffocating, stretching across the room like a heavy fog, and as Ridge finally spoke, his voice was hollow and cracked. He told Brooke he needed time. He told her he didn't know what this meant for their marriage. He told her he couldn't promise he would ever look at her the same way again. Hope whispered that she loved her mother but needed space to process everything, and Brooke watched helplessly as the two people she loved most walked away from her. Not with anger, not with screaming, but with heartbreak so deep it felt like the floor beneath her was disappearing. And as the door closed, Brooke felt completely alone, realizing that her secret, the one she thought she had buried forever, had now resurfaced with such force it threatened to destroy everything she had built, everything she cherished. And in that moment, she understood that the real battle was only beginning, because the person who had been blackmailing her, the person who knew the truth, the person who had come back to haunt her, was still out there. And now that the secret was out, they would stop at nothing to make sure Brooke paid the ultimate price. Brooke stood there frozen long after Ridge and Hope walked out, unable to move, unable to breathe, her hands trembling so violently she had to grip the edge of the table just to stay upright. And as the door slowly clicked shut behind them, the silence in the room became deafening, echoing with every word she had forced herself to confess, every image she had tried so desperately to bury, every fear she had carried alone for all those years, and the weight of it all felt heavier than anything she had ever experienced, heavier than the scandals, heavier than the betrayals, heavier than every gossip headline and every humiliation she had endured across decades of being in the Forrester orbit. And the more she replayed the look of devastation on Ridge's face, the more she felt her heart fracture, because she had known this moment would hurt him, but she hadn't expected the kind of hollow, stunned heartbreak she saw in his eyes. It wasn't anger, it wasn't shock, it was the look of a man who had just watched the foundation of his life crumble into dust. She wanted to run after him, to grab his hand, to force him to look at her and remind him that she wasn't the monster her mistake made her seem, that she was still Brooke, the woman he had loved more times than either of them could count. But she also knew that chasing him right now would only push him further away, because Ridge wasn't just processing a betrayal. He was processing the aftermath of a truth he never imagined could be connected to Brooke. Meanwhile, Hope walked down the hallway outside in a daze, replaying her mother's confession over and over again like a looping nightmare she couldn't escape, her mind shattering under the weight of the revelation, because it wasn't just a secret, it was a truth that changed everything she thought she understood about her childhood, her family, her mother's past, and even her own sense of moral compass. She found herself sinking into a chair in the Forrester office, trying to hold on to something familiar, something steady, because nothing else in her world felt real anymore. And for the first time she wondered whether her mother had been protecting her or lying to her for reasons she still didn't fully understand. But what none of them knew, not Ridge, not Hope, not even Brooke, was that the person who had been blackmailing Brooke, the person who had orchestrated years of silent torment, the person whose presence had always hovered like a shadow just out of sight, had already returned fully to Los Angeles, moving quietly through the cracks of the Forrester empire like a ghost slipping through walls, studying every vulnerability, watching every reaction, every argument, every moment of heartbreak, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This person, someone the Forresters thought long gone, someone whose fall from grace had been spectacular and humiliating, had been waiting for Brooke's world to crack open, because once Ridge and Hope learned the truth, Brooke would no longer be protected by their loyalty, and the secret that had been weaponized for so long could finally be used to destroy the entire family. Back in the mansion, Ridge paced the length of the living room like a man trapped inside his own skin, unable to sit, unable to rest, unable to process the storm of emotions crashing through him. He thought about the years he had defended Brooke, the times he had gone to war with Taylor, Steffi, Thomas, and practically the entire Forrester family in her defense, and now he felt foolish, betrayed, blindsided, because the woman he had defended so fiercely had hidden a truth that could have destroyed them both, and worse, she had allowed herself to be manipulated and threatened for years without telling him, leaving him out of a battle that involved their family's safety. He poured himself a drink but never lifted it, just stared at the glass with a distant expression, as though trying to understand how his life had shifted so dramatically in a matter of minutes. He kept replaying Brooke's words, that whispered name, the name of the person she accidentally hurt all those years ago, the person whose so-called disappearance had once been the center of Forrester gossip, and every time Ridge heard it echo in his mind, he felt another part of his heart harden. If this person was back, if they were alive, then everything Brooke had tried to hide, everything she had buried, was about to come roaring back with the kind of vengeance that could shatter families. Hope, on the other hand, struggled to reconcile the idea that the mother she adored was capable of something so life-altering. She felt betrayed as a daughter but also deeply afraid, because if Brooke had been hiding this for so long, what else had she been carrying alone? What other dangers had been lurking around them without their knowledge? She wanted comfort, she wanted certainty, but the only thing she felt was dread settling into her bones like cold rain. Meanwhile, Brooke stayed alone in the office, wiping her tears, wishing she could turn back time, wishing she could undo that night, wishing she could erase every moment that led to this unraveling. But life had never given her that option, and she knew the only thing she could do now was brace herself for the fallout, because Ridge might never forgive her, and Hope might never trust her again. The truth, however, was only the beginning of the storm, because as the night deepened over Los Angeles, the blackmailer, the person whose knowledge of Brooke's secret had fueled years of manipulation, finally made their presence known again. A shadow slipped across the Forrester property, moving like someone who knew the land intimately, someone who had walked those grounds long before, someone who felt entitled to reclaim the life they believed had been stolen from them. They watched the house from a distance, their eyes cold, their heartbeat steady, their lips curling into a bitter, triumphant smile, because the moment they had waited for had finally come. Brooke Logan was exposed, Ridge Forrester was shattered, Hope Logan was rattled, and the Forrester family was once again vulnerable. And when this person whispered into the night, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. A promise that the next move would destroy everything Brooke had worked so hard to protect. Back inside the office, Brooke suddenly felt a chill crawl across her skin. The kind of cold that didn't come from temperature but from instinct. From the gut level feeling that someone dangerous was watching, waiting, moving closer. She closed her eyes, bracing herself because she knew this wasn't over. In fact, the real nightmare was just beginning. Brooke wrapped her arms around herself as that strange chill lingered in the room. A whisper of dread she couldn't shake, and even though she tried to convince herself it was nothing more than the emotional storm she had just unleashed, deep down she knew better. Secrets didn't stay quiet for decades without consequences, and the moment they surfaced, the world always shifted in dangerous ways. She wiped her cheeks, steadied her breathing, and tried to gather the strength to face whatever came next. But the silence felt wrong now, heavy and suffocating, as if it were warning her that she was no longer alone in the chaos she had tried to outrun. Meanwhile, Ridge had retreated to the Forrester guest house, unable to face anyone, especially Brooke. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, head buried in his hands, replaying everything she said, every tremor in her voice, every detail of the confession, and the more he tried to make sense of it, the more he felt himself unraveling. How could she have carried such a massive truth alone? How could she have looked him in the eyes for years without letting him see the fear behind them? Ridge had forgiven many things in his life. Affairs, rivalries, betrayals, but this was different. It wasn't just about loyalty. It wasn't just about trust. It was about the very core of who Brooke was, the very foundation of their relationship. And tonight he realized that the woman he loved had built parts of their life on a lie he never knew existed. A part of him wanted to run back to her, to wrap his arms around her and tell her they would face this together. But another part couldn't ignore the fear twisting in his stomach, because if the person Brooke accidentally hurt was truly alive and returning, then the threat wasn't just emotional, it was physical. It was dangerous. Hope, alone in her office, stared at a blank wall as her thoughts raced uncontrollably. She kept seeing her mother as she was earlier, shaking, terrified, desperate, and Hope felt her heart break all over again. She wanted to blame Brooke. She wanted to protect her. She wanted to run to her. She wanted to run away from her. No emotion made sense. They all blended together in a painful tangle she couldn't escape. Everything she believed about her mother, her softness, her honesty, her determination to always do what was right, felt suddenly complicated. Hope had always seen her mother as someone who made mistakes but never with malice, never with cruelty, never in a way that could truly destroy a life. But this secret, this truth, it shook her to her core. And what terrified Hope most was the idea that someone had been using it to manipulate Brooke for years. That meant danger wasn't coming. It was already here. And on the other side of Los Angeles, in a dimly lit apartment overlooking the city, the shadowy figure who held Brooke's secret finally stepped forward into the moonlight. Their face was hardened by years of resentment, shaped by betrayal, sharpened by a need for vengeance that had simmered too long beneath the surface. They lifted a stack of old photographs, grainy, time-worn images of Brooke from the night everything changed, and traced their fingers over the edges with a slow, chilling calm. "You thought you could bury me," the figure murmured to the empty room. "But now, I'm going to bury everything you love." They slid the photos back into a folder marked with Brooke's name and locked it inside a briefcase. Then, without hesitation, they grabbed their coat and stepped out into the night, ready to make their next move. Back at Forrester Creations, Brooke finally pushed herself away from the desk and began walking toward the door, but halfway there she stopped, the atmosphere shifting again. She wasn't alone. She could feel it. The faintest sound echoed somewhere in the hallway. A soft tap, like a shoe brushing against the floor, and Brooke's heart seized. "Is someone there?" she whispered, but her voice cracked, barely audible even to herself. The hallway remained still, but her instincts told her the danger she feared was already closing in. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't being paranoid. Someone was watching. Someone had followed. Someone was waiting. And as the lights flickered overhead, Brooke realized she had only two choices now. Let fear paralyze her, or prepare for the biggest battle of her life.